these messages. And welcome back to Two Guys on Politics. I'm Ray Hanania with my co-host, Bill Lipinski. Bill, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Raymond. How are you today?
Doing really good. The world hasn't changed much since our last Two Guys on Politics podcast last week. It's still as crazy as ever. I don't know if you got a chance to see this latest kerfuffle, I'll call it. It was very polite. It wasn't as mean as Trump has made it out to be in the past between President Trump and Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. And you know, right, he's been attacking Powell because he wants the interest rates to go down. And for some reason, Trump thinks that if he brings the interest rates down, it's good for America. Maybe let's before we talk about his fight with Powell. What do we know about the impact of interest rates? Do we know anything about it in terms of, obviously we don't want high interest rates, but on the other hand, do they really, prevent us from, living good lives?
Well, one of the greatest times for people purchasing homes was the early 1960s when I purchased mine, and I purchased mine in 1962, and the interest rate was 6%. Now, when you bought your first home, what was the interest rate?
Yeah, see, my first home I think was 1981, maybe 80 or 81, and the interest rate was 12.8%. I
Unbelievable.
bought it. Yeah, it was. But, we went through a period in the 80s where everything was skyrocketing. But I got to tell you, their houses were flying off the shelf. People were buying houses like crazy, even with 12%, because if you have a business or you deduct you file your income taxes and you have deductions. Um, I'm a sole proprietor, so I have everything lumped together as a company and I deduct everything. I can deduct those interest rates. They're deductible. And I'm not even, I think they may even be deductible from regular families too, off their income taxes. So I didn't mind that interest rate as long as I could deduct it. It was the property tax that you could deduct also that Trump screwed us on the last time he was president, limiting it to $10,000. We used
Uh,
to be able to
well,
deduct everything.
I know that we thought that 6% interest was so very, very high. It was a
Really?
20-year mortgage, 6% interest, that we paid it off in 9 years
Right.
because we thought we were paying so much, particularly when about 5 years in, they increased it to 6.625%. And at that part, at that time, my wife and I decided that we've got to get out from under this. This is horrendous. And well, it really wasn't so bad looking back at all. But at the time, we seemed to think it was terrible. And I did think it was terrible at the time. In fact, I even went to a different savings and loan to see if I could get a better deal from them. But they said I would be better off staying where I was at because of all the new charges that they would have to put on my loan.
Yeah, yeah, and I remember, we did shop around to see if we get a lower interest rate because it made the monthly payment cheaper. A higher interest rate makes your payment higher. So yes, maybe it could have an impact. But this over the past several months, President Trump has been attacking Jerome Powell. First, he said he wanted to fire him, and then it turns out the president can't fire the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. I think that Congress would have to, they appoint him
Yes.
and he serves out his term and they would appoint somebody. So that's a little confusing. I mean, Trump has changed everything, the order of everything. I'm not sure. I know Trump is saying he would appoint a successor to Powell when Powell's term ends. But his criticism of Powell is that he wants Jerome Powell to reduce the interest rates. And if he reduces the interest rates, it's good for the American people and will save them money. But I think it just makes him look good in the face of all those huge increases that he passed in his budget, the big, beautiful bill that the Democrats call the big, ugly bill. So I don't know who to believe, to be honest with you.
Well, unfortunately, once again, we get back to that same point, Ray. Who do you believe?
Yeah.
Neither one of the parties are believable any longer because everything that they say simply enhances their position, makes themselves look good. And you have almost no one inside of a party criticizing the party itself. And the news media, we got your left, your right news media. How can you believe them? You know,
Yeah.
you CNN, they don't say a good word about Trump. Okay. You go to Fox, Fox thinks Trump, the rises and sun sets on his head. He's fantastic. So you really have to be diligent as an American citizen to delve into a lot of different sources to find out what the truth is today. And unfortunately, so many Americans do not have the appetite or the interest to do that.
Well, we're so busy. I mean, the average family now are two working parents, if you're even married. Some families only have a single parent, but, both parents are in today's world have to work, to pay the bills and for all the things that they want. I remember when I was younger, my dad and mom both worked. But it was a much easier life. I think the house back when, in the 60s, the cost of the house was only $3,000. It wasn't a lot of money. Inflation has destroyed us. And trying to control inflation, I guess there is no way to control inflation because that destroys our economy, I think.
Well, you
Just
can control inflation by not printing money. That's why you wind up having inflation. The government prints too much money. But unfortunately, uh, our price for a house, our first house, which we bought in 1962, was $18,500.
well, you had a big house because ours was only like we lived on the southeast side of Chicago, was I think $4,000.
No, it had to be
18,000
more
was
than
one of
that.
those mansions. You must have lived in one of those
Uh,
Winnetka mansions.
yeah, that's why they call me Bungalow Bill because I lived in one of those mansions. Yes,
Was it a bungalow, by the way, or
it was
similar?
a bungalow. Yes,
Bungalow, yeah. Those are beautiful homes, by the way, bungalows. Very nice, well built. That was a character of Chicago, those bungalows, right?
yes, absolutely. The
Yeah, those are
backbone
great.
of Chicago.
And as you say, it was at that time, it did increase the cost of the house, right? The interest
Oh,
obviously
sure,
increases what you
absolutely.
have to pay every month on your mortgage. But this week, yesterday, I think it was, President Trump and Senator uh, Scott, I think it was. Uh,
That's Tim Scott. Yeah,
is it Tim Scott?
yes,
Yeah, and
he ran for president for a while.
yeah, Tim Scott. I've never heard of anything about him. I guess he's a business and
South
politician
Carolina, I
from
believe.
South Carolina. Is that what it is? And I don't know. Is he like he's a Republican, African American, and Trump obviously was touting him, and for obvious reasons, I think he likes to exploit the racial thing a little bit, makes it look like he's not anti-black or anti-minority, because he does get criticized a lot for that. But him and Senator Scott were touring the construction of the new Federal Reserve complex area. I guess it's three buildings. And Tim Scott leaned to the president and said, "Hey, here's there's over cost overruns in the billions. It was like 3.1 billion. He said the costs were like enormous." And Trump goes, "Yeah, we got to, Mr. Powell isn't doing a very good job controlling the costs of these constructions." And Powell's looking at him like, "What are you guys talking about? You didn't even," basically, and you could see in his face, he's saying, "You don't even know what you're talking about." And then Tim Scott pulls out a piece of paper and hands it to the president, and the president opens it up and says, "See, right here, it says it's from your office." And Jerome Powell takes the paper. Very nice. He was very respectful. I give Jerome Powell a lot of credit. And he looks at it and he says, "Oh, this is an old building. You're talking about a building that's already been built 5 years ago." been paid for. And then Scott, Senator Scott immediately goes, "Oh no, but it's still an overcost. There was a overpayments, and we're going to be paying." And Trump's going, "Yes, we're still paying for that money." And Jerome Powell's just shaking his head left to right, going, "Oh my God, these people, he doesn't know." But believe it or not, in spite of that confrontation, it still was friendly. Trump, which is a character thing about him. When you're not with him, he will call you every kind of name. But when you're in front of him, he doesn't have the, I don't know if it's the courage or the disrespect to call you a name to your face. Whatever he says about people, he says on TV, not to their face or in his social media. And he joked with Powell, saying, "Listen, I know we've had some disagreements, and I don't want to say anything bad about him. I'm with him. We want to move forward. What's good for the country, blah, blah, blah." And then he took his left hand and slapped Powell, not on his butt, on the side of his back, and said, "All I wish is that Powell would reduce the interest rates, because with interest rates so high, people can't buy homes and are, homes are not selling." And Tim Scott went on a big rant about, yeah, if we had lower interest rates, our home markets would increase and that would create jobs. And he just went on and on. And I'm going, what are these guys talking about? Trump and Scott, it was like they didn't even know what it was they were talking about.
Well, I had a dinner once with Senator Scott and several other people, four or five other people, and I was very disappointed in meeting him. He didn't seem to have anywhere near the grasp of issues that I thought he would have. I asked him a couple of questions, and after the second question, I didn't bother asking him anymore because I was so dissatisfied with his first two answers. So I'm not surprised at Scott following the president around in trying to ingratiate himself to the president. I think he's going to need the president's support the next time he runs for election. And as far as the Federal Reserve, you know, a chairman of the Federal Reserve has never been fired in the history of the Federal Reserve, which was set up by President Woodrow Wilson back in the 1920s. So I don't think Trump really wants to do that because it'll give the Democrats another opportunity to call him a dictator. And I think that he gets a little bit tired of hearing that. And I think that ruffles his feathers a little bit too much. But he deserves it because of the things that he does, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I was going to say that he, I don't know if it's a good thing for the president to control the Federal Reserve.
I don't think it is.
It's just, we have a system where everybody has their responsibility. The president oversees it with the Congress, the Senate, and the House. And that's the way the system should be. So, but I give that Jerome Powell, I give him credit. He's a smart guy. He stood up to the president. He wasn't disrespectful. He was very respectful, but he wasn't afraid to say, "You're wrong." He kept shaking his and I'm looking at him, and the president just pretended like he wasn't there when he was saying stuff. He was just totally ignoring him. So it doesn't give me much faith in our economy, Bill. I'm really worried, especially once Jerome Powell is gone. I'm going to be, because the president will probably put Tim Scott in his seat because he really was pumping up Scott like he's a genius when it comes to the economy. All right, Bill, you have.
Listen, I am saying, what do you know? Is there anything you know about Trump and his relationship with the guy that liked very young women?
Oh, Epstein,
Yeah,
Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, did you read where Trump was introduced to his wife by Epstein?
I heard that.
Did you
It's
hear
hard,
that?
but it goes back to our problem with the news media. It's hard to know when the media is being true media,
That's
factual,
right.
or spin media, which is what the media mostly is today. So yeah, I had heard that, and it's very confusing. But I have a bottom line feeling that Trump, the Democrats and the Republicans, all the big shots, Trump, all the celebrities, Bill Clinton, all Hillary Clinton, all these Democrats and Republicans, they all were in Epstein's grip, and they enjoyed what they thought at the time was safe, terrible circumstances that they could enjoy on an island that Epstein owned. And now there's a great effort to protect everybody's names, not just Trump, but also Clinton and the Democrats. So it's like both sides. Nobody wants any of this stuff released.
No, I would agree with you with that. Yeah, that's part of the deep state that Trump was going to root out.
Yeah.
And that's why many of his followers are becoming disillusioned with him because he's not doing much to root out the deep state.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how all this impacts the midterm elections. And I'm not sure. I think it evens. I mean, just to not go off on a segue here, but I think it all evens out. I don't think the Democrats are going to do much better than they have done because there are a lot of problems with the Democratic Party too. But I'm still hopeful that that third party from Elon Musk, the America Party, is going to pull the rug out from the Republican Party, and we won't have any major party controlling the House or the Senate, which I think would be a good thing and force both sides to come together and talk, which is, I think, the great hope that I have for this country.
Well, I have the same hope, no question about it. We need somehow to get together, the politicians and the people. But I think the only way it's going to happen is if the people really get together and force the parties to start looking to work for the good of the American people, not work for their own good and the success and the power of their own party.
All right. And then your column, let's go ahead and have you do your column, is on the breakdown of the two-parent family and how it's deteriorating and the impact that it has on our society. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Ray. My commentary last week talked about the people of America losing their faith and the significant decline in people attending religious services and practicing a religion. I stated this last week and said I believed it was weakening the strength economically and militarily and morally of our land of the free and home of the brave. I am very sorry to say I do not believe we are the nation that climbed out of the Great Depression to return to world economic leadership, won the Second World War for ourselves and for all of mankind, and won the Cold War creating greater opportunities for the freedom and democracy to flower around the world. I believe the second great pillar of strength for the American Republic was the strength of the family. Faith in family ignited the physical strength, moral courage, and intellectual capacity to chop and hoe and rake and clear and dig, to remove the trees and underbrush to create the great American Republic out of this enormous wilderness. Extremely unfortunately today, the American family is breaking down and has been for a number of years. Strong families have long been the backbone of our nation, providing stability, values, and a foundation for future generations. As I stated earlier, over the course of the last few decades, we have witnessed a significant decline in traditional family structure. What has caused this in our fortress of freedom and land of liberty? Following are some of my ideas on what has caused this to occur. Marriage, once considered a lifelong commitment, is now seen as optional or temporarily. Divorce rates peaked in the 1970s and the 1980s, but remain very high today. At the same time, single-parent households have become much more prevalent. Studies show that children from single-parent households often face greater economic struggles, lower educational opportunities, and increased emotional challenges. The weakening of religious and community ties has also played a very significant part in the demise of the two-parent family. Historically, churches, local community organizations, and extended families provided strong support systems that reinforced traditional family values. However, religious participation has declined in recent decades, leading to a weakening of the support networks. Without these stabilizing influences, many families lack the moral and social guidance that once helped them keep themselves together. With government assistance programs are necessary, support struggling families. Some policies have unintentionally contributed to family breakdown. Welfare programs that provide greater benefit to single-family households than to married couples can discourage marriage and family unity. Additionally, policies that fail to support working families, such as a lack of affordable child care, job opportunities, can create economic stresses that further destabilize families. In conclusion, the family remains the most fundamental unit of society. When families thrive, communities thrive. When families break down, the effects ripple through the generations. It is up to us to work together for solutions that strengthen the family and restore the American family, ensuring a brighter future for our children and our nation. Each and every American must become stronger, morally, physically, and better educated to fully understand the obligations of marriage, the individual responsibility that is necessary to create a happy, productive marriage and produce educated, morally responsible children. Until next time, enjoy yourself and thanks for listening to my column.
All right, good column, Bill. You know, I like the idea of addressing the two-parent family because I know when I grew up, my dad worked 40 to 60 hours a week. And my mom, she had a part-time job, but she was at home taking care of the house and the kids. Now, if I didn't have a parent taking care of me, I probably would have been worse than I was as a child. I had a sister, younger sister, and an older brother. I don't know what would have happened if there wasn't a parent to prevent us from even inadvertently crossing a line and doing something that would get us in trouble. Sometimes you don't mean to do things, but you don't know things because, you're young, and a parent is supposed to be a guide. This whole topic that you're talking about, addresses a big issue that a lot of people don't really want to talk about. They just want to talk about the consequences of interfering with what's happening rather than talking about the damage that's done when there's only one parent in a family.
I
And
don't think that people have any idea how much damage is done to children of one parent families.
yeah, I don't know. How do you control your kid? Do you hope that your kid is smart enough with common sense not to do the things that they might do on their own? Do you know what I mean? You need a parent with experience. And it also creeps into this question about who should have influence over my kids? The government, the school, or me, at least until my children are 16. Up until the age of 16, I should have complete control over them. Nobody should be telling my kid what to believe, what their religion should be, or what their sex should be, or this whole transgender issue. I have no problem with an adult who decides, hey, I'm really a woman. and I want to change from being a man to a woman. That's your choice. You do whatever you want. But don't push that kind of logic into the heads of my kids who are vulnerable to this type of messaging and influence. And, it's like a propaganda, political propaganda, that they might believe that and sympathize with something. Let me, as a parent, decide. So, this whole topic that you're talking about, I think is very important. And unfortunately, when it's addressed, the response from people who are upset with it turns immediately to race and racism. So if we talk about single parents, they talk about the broken families that happen to be in African American communities, and I know that there are just as many white families that have single parents as black families. I just don't believe that. And Hispanics, some Hispanics, and also, when you talk about the Arab and Muslim community, where they may have two wives, this whole structure. So people don't want to talk about it. I don't know if because they think it's too personal or what, but I think that it's a good topic and we should have an open and honest discussion about it.
Well, thank you, Ray, and I certainly agree with that. I don't think there's anything more important to the success of a nation than a strong two-parent family unit.
Yeah, and mainly because, again, it's young people don't have the experience to make their own decisions.
And I'd like to comment on something you said in regards to what gender I belong to. Fine, if you're in your 20s and you decide you've been a man, but you're really a woman, you want to change, wonderful. But when you start talking about 8, 9, 10-year olds,
Right,
you know, the school, the doctor, someone saying, "Oh, I think he's not really a boy, he should be a girl."
right,
They don't know what they are at
right.
that particular age, boys or girls. And I think that that's a terrible thing that we were allowing people to do in this country for a number of years. And thankfully, President Trump has pretty much put a stop to all of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's a heightened awareness of the threat to the two-parent family and this idea that outside forces, outside lobbies, I'm going to call them, for whatever, the right or the left, they want to tell us how to raise our kids. And I don't think that's anybody's business. As long as I don't cross the line and hurt my kids, or inflict violence on my kids, nobody, and as long as I uh, give my kids the basics that they need, to survive and become better people. Nobody should interfere with that whatsoever. Sexual
Absolutely.
education, all that stuff. It really bothers me. Religion, what they believe, that's up to me to decide. I happen to be Christian, not because some outside agency said I need to be Christian, but that's what my parents were. They were Christian. Had they been Jewish, I know I'd be Jewish. Had they been Muslim, I know I'd be Muslim. But that was a choice of my family. My parents, who lived long lives, they decided what they decided, and I followed in their footsteps. What's wrong with that? That model, I think, is the way we should go, but it's a hard case to make in today's world. They want that stopped.
Yep.
All right, Bill, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to switch topics and talk about uh, Zelensky in the Ukraine and the controversial law that he's pushing that would bring an end to two special anti-corruption agencies that were set up that would be put under the prosecutor general's office. Now, to me, it looks like consolidation, but we'll talk a little bit about that and how it's impacting the war in Ukraine. I'm Ray Hanania with Bill Lipinski. We're going to be right back right after these messages. And welcome back to segment two of Two Guys on Politics here at WNZK AM 690 Radio. and on the U.S. Arab Radio Network, and also broadcast on YouTube, where it's easy to find us. You just go to youtube.com, type in Two Guys on Politics, or just go to twoguysonpolitics.com and you'll find our podcast, audio, video that Bill Lipinski and I do every week, talking about whatever the big news topics are each week in politics, and our columns that we both write for the newspapers. So one of the topics we were going to talk about is there's Netanyahu started a war. Well, he didn't start the war in Gaza, but it's been going on forever. October 7th, the Hamas terrorists killed 1,200 Israelis. Netanyahu responded, but he's been responding for almost 3 years, killing Palestinians, destroying the property there, the businesses, the homes, and not just killing Hamas, but killing a lot of innocent people, Muslim and Christian. He's bombed every Christian church that exists in the Gaza. And a lot of people don't hear much about Christian churches in Gaza, but there's several Baptist churches, Protestant churches, and Catholic churches. They've been almost all destroyed by Netanyahu's war. Then Netanyahu expanded the war into Lebanon against Hezbollah. That went on for many months, and then he expanded, and he's been striking them every once in a while. Then he attacked Iran. He launched an attack on Iran. The United States supported him. And of course, I don't know if you saw the news this week where somebody said, well, the U.S. bunker bombs destroyed one of the three nuclear centers, but the other two are still going strong. So the bragging that President Trump did, he just can't stop himself from exaggerating stuff instead of just telling us the truth. I think it hurts him in the long run. So there's a war in Iran, and now Israel has attacked Syria because Israel has a Druze population that doesn't consider itself Arab and it's not Muslim. So the Israelis have kind of saddled up to the Druze, and the Druze serve in the Israeli military. So they invaded Syria, started bombing the middle of Damascus, the capital of Syria, after the new president of Syria said that he was willing to work with the Israelis, even to secede the Golan Heights, which was Syrian territory, to the Israelis, and still the Israelis went in and attacked Syria. It's a mess. And all that has led to one big thing. So many Israelis have served in the military, they're getting tired of it. There have been so many Israelis that have been killed. And now there's a bill that was introduced that says that the Orthodox Jews, the most conservative religious Jews, must serve in the military. And the religious coalitions that are the foundation of Netanyahu's political party have said, if that goes through, we're going to quit your government and you'll collapse. And that brings more turmoil. Almost, it's kind of ironic. Netanyahu and Trump are facing internal turmoil from their own people. What is it? How significant is this to you and to Americans, do you think?
Well, let me ask you the question. Why is it that Netanyahu has got himself involved in so many wars, other than the wars that he originally got involved with because he was attacked,
Right.
By Hamas, was it? Yes.
Right. Well,
okay. I mean, I can understand that. They killed 12,000 or 1,200 people. But he has, it seems like he's gotten drunk with power.
right.
And he's going all over the place, attacking countries in the Middle East. And why is he doing that? What is his motivation? Is it because the United States is standing behind him and he's taking this opportunity before he even loses support in the United States to go after countries that he wants to go after? I don't know. I don't understand it. I said right off the bat that I supported the Israelis and what they did in Gaza. Okay. I didn't support their tactics, but I supported, getting rid of the people who were trying to kill them. But I said at the time, I felt that he was going about it in the wrong way. And that was very, very early in the conflict. And I think that is what has caused him to lose support with many, many countries.
Yeah.
I mean, the United States supports them. Who else supports them?
Yeah, listen, Israel is isolating itself, but for Netanyahu, he needs those religious parties. But at this point, with so many Israeli soldiers being killed, being wounded, there are like 500,000 Israeli soldiers that are getting medical treatment in this Gaza war and Lebanon war and Iran war and Syria war, that they need soldiers. One of the agreements that Netanyahu made to form his coalition, because if you take the religious party away, the left has much more support, but it's short of forming a coalition. They have a parliamentary form of government where you got to get 50 plus 1% of the vote to, and you could patch it together with different political parties. They may have like 30 parties, that have two people or five people or 20 people based on how well a party does in the election. So Netanyahu wasn't able to put together a coalition. So he had to go to the religious parties, and the religious parties are dead set against peace with the Palestinians. The religious parties are behind the settlements that they're building in the West Bank, and they take Palestinian lands, they build a settlement, they cordon off or fence off the Palestinians so they can't go into those areas. It really, some people compare it to like South Africa when they had these Buntastans, before South Africa when it was an apartheid state. And that word is often used by Israel's critics. So the religious parties want an end to any hope for a Palestinian state. And I think without a Palestinian state, the Middle East will be deadlocked in conflict forever.
I
It's a
agree.
price he paid, to stay in power because he has been in power 22 years. Originally, because of what he said were the betrayals he said by the Palestinians, but then later, as the push for peace started to move forward, the only way to stop it was to create a government that would reject it and throw out the peace accords that were signed. So he's kind of between a rock and a hard place. The only benefit for him is that the Knesset, I guess, ends next week. Their parliament closes next week, and they're out for 3 months, which means that maybe this won't have to be decided until the middle of the fall in October. So what does that mean for these conflicts that we keep seeing? That the U.S. we fund it. Whatever Israel fires in Syria, whatever missile, that's a missile that we have to pay for as taxpayers, American taxpayers. The Israelis are not paying for any of those missiles. It's us. Obviously, they're paying for it with lives when they're killed, but so are so many other people with weapons that we're giving Israel. And I know that many of a growing number of Republicans are upset with him, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who by the way, I can't say enough how much I like her. She's more to the center than a lot of other Republicans, and she wants to stop giving any money to foreign countries. She wants all that money to go to Americans. And she wants to get rid of the illegal aliens too. She's a very pro-American American. That's what I like about her.
Sounds like she's your candidate for president next time around, Ray.
You know what? Until I see a better Democrat, which I don't see a good Democrat at all, I think she may actually get the support of the America Party that Elon Musk is putting together. What do you think about this whole Middle East? Does it bother you that we're dragged into these things financially and even sometimes militarily?
Oh, it bothers me a great deal. Absolutely. There's no question about it. I can understand supporting Israel. I've always supported Israel. I will continue to do so. But I think that we have to have greater checks and balances on what the Israelis do, okay? Because we are funding them. I mean, and it's our military might that keeps them alive in the Middle East. It was really us, recognizing them back in 1948 that have allowed them to build a government that they have built over there. But we should exercise more influence on the Israelis. I think it would help the overall situation because you're going to in order to have peace in the Middle East, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm far from being an expert, is you have to have a state for the Palestinians, okay? And you have to have the coming together of other nations in the Middle East with the Israelis based upon some common ground of perhaps economic improvement for the entire region.
Yeah, the Saudis have said they would consider signing a peace deal with Israel, and then many other Arab countries would follow if they did it, on the condition that the Israelis supported a Palestinian state. And the Israelis, with this right-wing government that's driven by the religious parties, are absolutely against it. And it's really caused a real breakdown and problem between the two countries.
Ray, Ray, do you remember exactly who was it that first advocated the two-state solution?
Well, originally it was Edward Said and Ibrahim Abu-Lughod. He was a Northwestern political science professor. They went to the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, and Arafat embraced the idea. So then they went to the U.S. They started talking after the Israelis and Egyptians made peace. And then the Intifada started in 1990. They thought they needed to prevent Hamas from rising. And the best way to do that was to create a peace accord with Israel because Hamas began in the 1990s as a military force that rivaled the secular Palestinian leadership and Arafat. So Arafat was always against Hamas. But the way the two areas were divided, the West Bank and Gaza, and the control that Israel had between the two, Arafat never really had control over Gaza at all. So Hamas continued to grow. So it's always been a problem. And it grew from there, and it almost went until the Israelis killed Yitzhak Rabin, their prime minister, for signing the accord with Arafat. And Ariel Sharon and Netanyahu came into power and basically put Arafat in a prison. They locked him down in Ramallah, in a village in the West Bank, preventing him from doing anything. And then they broke all of the agreements because fundamentally they're against any peace accord because the land is so small. Palestinians and Israelis living on the same land, they argue there isn't enough room for both together. It's either one or the other. So that was always a big
Didn't
problem.
they live that way for a couple of centuries?
Well, in all honesty, my dad grew up in Palestine, and Palestine was predominantly Muslim and Christian, and there was a Jewish population. And the Jewish population was a minority population until World War II, when no, believe me, the Allies, we did a lot to destroy the Nazis. The Holocaust was horrible, all the Jews that were killed by the Nazis, but nobody wanted the Jews. The Americans didn't
That's
want the
true.
Jews, the British didn't want the Jews, and they thought, let's send them to Palestine where they can create their own state. That was their strategy, and that's why we ended up with the problem in Palestine because the Arabs believed that they should have a state that would be Christian, Muslim, and Jewish, a holy land that everybody shared, not controlled by one religion. And that problem has never been solved, and it just keeps getting worse. It's a horrible, situation where so many people have died. And I don't see an answer to it, especially with when you have like a far right leader like Netanyahu. And Israel has been away from the labor liberal movement for 22 years, and it looks like they're losing control. It's mainly Russian immigrants, Russian Jews from the Soviet Union that escaped that are the most conservative because they lived under the oppression of Stalin and the Russians, and they don't want to live like that again, and they fear the Arabs are like that. So they completely oppose anything that has to do with sharing the land with Christians and Muslims.
What is the population of Israel?
I believe it's 12 million. I'd have to look at it, maybe
Okay.
14 million. And that includes, I think, uh, maybe 4,000 Christians and Muslims. and then you have the West Bank and Gaza, which has about 2 million or in Gaza that has like 2 million Palestinians. There were something like about 100,000 settlers in Gaza that left, and then they surrounded Gaza and turned it into an open air prison. They weren't going to allow the Palestinians to create their own government in Gaza. So whatever was done never ended up being what it was supposed to be in either case. And they both blame each other, but nobody ever gets to the core that both sides are responsible and both sides have contributed to it, and both sides have, Hamas and the Likud really have driven this to the conflict that it's at. So, an unresolvable problem that unfortunately you and me, Bill, are more money goes into the Israel than what I put into out of my taxes and what I put into Social Security, which Trump screwed us on, by the way. But let me talk about my quick column.
Yes, please
We have
do so.
about 5 minutes left here, max. So my column is about who should succeed Dick Durbin as a U.S. Senator. And there are three candidates, leading candidates. And this column is at hanania.com. You could read the whole column there. And instead of reading the whole column, I like to just summarize it. The three candidates are Juliana Stratton, who is the lieutenant government and has the backing of Daddy Warbucks, Governor J.B. Pritzker. But you know what? He's not giving her a lot of money. I think he only gave her $7,000. And then five-term U.S. Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. Now, nobody can say his last name, but they do know how to say Raja because Raja spends a lot of money addressing that issue, and he's done that over the past 7 to 8 of the 10 years that he's been in Congress. His first year, he didn't focus on his name, but in the last 6 to 8 years, he's sold the name as a strategy to build his popularity. And then there's five-term Congresswoman Robin Kelly, who's from the second district south of Chicago, which includes Matteson, Kankakee, and goes all the way down to Danville, goes straight down south of Chicago. Now, the nice thing I like about Kelly over Krishnamurthy or Raja and Juliana Stratton is that Stratton was under the shadow of Pritzker. She really didn't do much. She's a nice person, but I can't think of one major piece of legislation that she fought for that made a difference for voters in Illinois. And Roger Krishnamurthy is the same way. I went through his list of what he supported. Now, he votes to support a lot of typical Democratic issues, but he never really identified with any particular issue, like fighting for the rights of, whatever. He's a decent guy. Like I said, he's India. He's from India. He was born in New Delhi, but he was raised in Peru. I'm sorry, in Peoria. He was raised in Peoria, and a lot of Democrats like him because they see a challenge coming from Darren LaHood, who is Lebanese American from Peoria, and Darren LaHood is going to be the Republican, probably the Republican nominee in the race next year in the general election to succeed Durbin. Who it'll be from the Democrats, we're not quite sure. Raja has raised something like $19 million. Kelly only has 2.2 million, and Juliana Stratton, hers is like less than 1 million, from what I can tell. So it looks like if you go by money, Raja Krishnamurthy may have it locked in, but Kelly has done so much when it comes to legislation and fighting for taxpayers. And I go through a whole litany of all her legislation in my column at hanania.com. You could read that, all her work and legislation on health care, prevention of gun violence. She introduced so many bills on improving education for kids, strengthening our technology and infrastructure. It's just a whole list. I mean, you just can't stop reading. She has introduced more legislation than most members of Congress. And you know that a lot of times, you go along with whatever the congressional leadership wants you to go along with. But it comes down to this. You're going to elect Krishnamurthy, who is basically a populist, who the party leaders like because he's politically safer, or do you support Kelly, who was a little more independent, a Democrat, and who's done so much to help the need of the taxpayers? The only thing, last thing I talk about in the column is how originally I didn't like Durbin. Durbin in 1982 was elected by defeating to Congress by defeating Paul Finley in the 20th congressional district. Paul Finley was a U.S. Navy veteran, a military veteran of our military, and he was the most outspoken critic of Israel because of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty on June 8th, 1967, when I think it was 34 U.S. sailors were killed by the Israelis in that attack. 34 American veterans killed, and 173 American veterans on the USS Liberty who were seriously injured. And it was buried at the time because the Israelis said, oh, we made a mistake. But that attack went on for hours, and so many people were killed. And the Israelis thought that the USS Liberty would share its communications. It was a communications or spy ship, they said, and they were afraid they'd share that information and the U.S. would realize what Israel was really doing in 1967, launching the war, and that Egypt never really had a chance of starting a war then. So he was probably the biggest critic of that, and I always admired him for that. But Durbin beat him. But so I never really liked Durbin. But when he became a U.S. Senator, his whole attitude changed on the Middle East. And he's been very moderate, very centrist, supportive of Palestinians and Israelis. He's done the right thing, and I admired him for that. But I still think Kelly, if you want to pick somebody who's going to do something and roll up her sleeves, I think she's the best candidate.
Well, I have two comments on that. One, I think that Dick Durbin changed his spots very, very significantly from the time he was first elected to Congress. He
Oh, yeah.
became more and more and more liberal in order to gain greater and greater influence in the Democratic Party. Some can criticize him for it. Some say he grew, he expanded himself. Okay.
Right.
It's up to you to make the decision. He and I were both very conservative when we came to Congress. I stayed the way I was. I was stuck in the mud. I didn't change my position. No matter what the National Democrats wanted me to do, I represented the people who sent me to Congress, okay? The other thing is, I think that, Durbin brought in a senator by the name of Tammy Duckworth. It was
Right.
his influence, the money he raised, a senator who, frankly, I don't think has done much of anything other than do exactly what Dick Durbin wanted her to do. So for those two reasons, I'm not a big fan of Durbin. As far as your candidate, anyone that I've mentioned her to thinks she's a very solid individual, that she is more independent than anyone else that's running, but she doesn't have a chance against Raja.
Because
That
he,
man has done a fantastic job in getting people
right.
to call him Raja and to think the sun rises and sets on his head. And one of the reasons for that is the $19 million that he has
Yes,
to spend.
he
So
is.
I think it's going to be Raja, no matter what anybody else has to say.
Yeah,
Now,
and that's
general election
unfortunate.
might be a different story because LaHood, if it is LaHood, I think is a very good candidate.
Yeah, I think LaHood is more of a centrist conservative, and I think
Yes,
he can do pretty well. But right, it's sad that we go toward a guy who's known more for his name than his legislation. And
very true.
people have been emailing me and saying they don't call him Raja, call him Nada because he hasn't introduced or done anything in 8 years. You'd think there'd be one piece of legislation rather than your name that you could sell to the voters and say, hey, I champion senior citizens and the elimination of the tax on Social Security, which is how Trump won much of his senior citizen base and then broke that promise in this last budget bill. So anyway, that's where it stands. Bill, we're at the end of our line here anyway, so I just want to say thank you and tell everybody thank you for listening to us.
It's always a pleasure, Ray. Look forward to seeing you and hearing you next week.
All right, we'll talk again. Thanks everybody for listening. Remember, go to twoguysonpolitics.com and sign up and subscribe. It's free and follow us, and we'll talk to you later. Bye bye, everybody.